I hope everyone is doing well. Today marks the last lesson in the series of Return to God. I want you to know it's been a privilege because this is really the first time we've had a combined service between Thailand and Malaysia. Not the whole Malaysia, but it's been a privilege. I'm grateful for our brothers and sisters in Bangkok. I'm not sure if our brothers and sisters in JB and Seremban actually knows, but the Bangkok church actually took up a collection for the building in KL. And out of their own accord, they decided to lend a helping hand to help us raise some money for our church building. And so this collaboration was certainly something that God brought together. Well, as in the past few messages, I'm going to do a little bit of summary because we've covered a lot. We started our series obviously more than a month ago before Chinese New Year. And our journey began at this period in this timeline, at a time when the first group of exiles were allowed to return to Jerusalem. God, if you remember, had miraculously worked it out for Cyrus, a pagan king Cyrus, to allow his people to return from exile in Babylon. Of course, it was taken over by Persia at that point, to go back to Jerusalem. Their first mission was to rebuild the temple. Like anything that God calls us to do on earth, there will always be some opposition, some challenges, but we must hold on to the faith that God has given us to complete his mission. And one of the first things that we must always get right, just like the Jews, the first thing that God told them to rebuild was not the walls, but rather the temple, because they have to center their lives on God. Life begins with God and it will end with God. So where should God be between life and death? He has to be at the center of our lives. So it should not be strange that God wants to be the top priority in everything that we do. In fact, with God being the center of our lives, well, our decisions, our choices would certainly be healthier, more spiritual, and be a lot better. And we found out that even though the temple was completed and that worship had been restored, for some reason, spirituality was not restored. And I think all of us know by now that we can be involved in many religious activities, even every day of the week. Certainly every week we can be involved in religious service, but that does not directly equate to us being spiritual or spiritually mature. So unfortunately for the Jews, they didn't separate themselves. They didn't set themselves apart. And in biblical terms, they did not live lives that were holy, set apart from God, for God, but instead they got back to, as what the Bible would say, some of the detestable practices. As a result, they lost 57 years of devotion, somewhere around there. And we learned that lost devotion is not just something that we shrug off, oh yeah, I lost some years of devotion, I'll just pick up where I left. Actually, we went on to see that they paid a very high cost for lost devotion. And that is a lesson for, hopefully, for all of us to remember, that we learn this so that we can understand that we should not take our relationship with God for granted. We must take it seriously, because there are consequences for lost spirituality. It is not just as simple as picking up where we left off. We must face the fact that we have to spend time to rebuild, restore our hearts, and of course, repent of our ways. So as difficult as we may imagine it to be, the best solution actually is to remain consistent. We don't need to have high dramas, but if we can remain consistent in our walk with God, it will actually save us many, many years of pain and heartache. We moved on to the book of Esther, and it seemed to be a time in the history when they had actually forgotten God. If you remember, and nowhere in the whole book was the word God, prayer, or even worship mentioned. It seemed as if the ways that God had passed down to them had been forgotten. And of course, we learned that that is the problem when they insisted on having a casual relationship with God. Having a casual relationship with God as opposed to a committed one will eventually lead us to forgetting a lot about God and His Word. That's not to say that you wake up and God is no longer in your memory, but we all understand He may be there, just like He was there for these guys. They talk about God, they go and they sacrifice their lamb. Their lives were so far from God's Word. Then last Sunday, we learned that in spite of how unfaithful the Jews had become toward God, God had always remained faithful to them. That He was not just faithful, but He was actually perfect in His faithfulness. It's almost as if God never left, even though God had actually left their hearts. They have actually left God out their hearts. And we saw that He had an incredible timing. And we learned the story of how Mordecai, Esther, and Mordecai was on the brink of death. If God had not intervened, reminded Xerxes, this guy saved you. And certainly we won't be reading the story about Esther today, as we know in the Bible. Today, obviously, it's the last sermon of the Return to God series. By no means this indicates that there is nothing left to learn from Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah. I think we all understand that. And whatever we have learned, it's only, I believe, the tip of the iceberg. But I will close this series with the book of Nehemiah. And I hope that this has inspired you to want to explore these three books even deeper. Nehemiah would represent the third and final mass, group of exiles in a mass return to Jerusalem. With each return, God made repairs to their broken spirituality. And this thing I appreciate about God. He truly is our Father. I mean, think about how many different ways we have broken, fellowship with God, so to speak. If you've been a Christian as long as I have been, over 30 years, there are many times when you look back and you think about the decisions and choices you made that you regretted, the not so spiritual, the sinful, and how God never fails to always try to reach out to us to repair that broken connection. In the three phases with the Jews that started with Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest, it began with them rebuilding the temple. And then the second group of exiles that went back with Ezra was sent to reinstate God's law. And then, of course, we know that Nehemiah was sent to rebuild the walls. And as we learned before, a city like Jerusalem without walls was completely vulnerable to their enemies. This was apparent from the rebuilding of the temple to the reinstatement of the laws. If you remember, we saw how people from outside of the city were always coming in and disrupting or trying to disrupt the plan of rebuilding God's people. 71 years after the temple was completed, they now attempt to reconstruct the walls. They actually started, but they could not finish. But 71 years after the temple was completed, the wall was finally erected under Nehemiah's leadership. So Nehemiah wanted to go back to rebuild the wall, but he had a problem because the king that he was serving as the cupbearer was Artaxerxes. And Artaxerxes had actually put a stop to the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So the king that he was serving under had given the command, you're not to rebuild Jerusalem. So how was he going to go back to rebuild the walls if Artaxerxes does not change his mind. So let's read in the Bible. As in Ezra chapter 4, it says the king to King Artaxerxes. Obviously, I'm just summarizing these few verses. The king should know that the Jews who had come to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. The opposition, again, painted a very negative picture of God's people. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if this city is built and its walls are restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid. The royal revenues will suffer. We inform the king that if the city is built and its walls are restored, you will be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. So somewhere during his reign, the enemies of the Jews wrote a nasty letter to Artaxerxes under the pretense of being concerned about his kingdom. But of course, we know that all they wanted was for the Jews to not be able to reestablish themselves as a people. So in response to the letter he received, Artaxerxes sent this reply. The letter you sent to us has been read and translated in my presence. I issued an order and a search was made. Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole Trans-Euphrates, and taxes, tribute, and duty were paid to them. Now issue an order to these men to stop work so that this city will not be rebuilt until I so order. And you know, the Persian king's order stands strong. Be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests? As soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum and Shimshai, the secretary and the associates, they immediately went to the Jews. They went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. Because now they have the letter of authority from the highest order. The king himself has ordered them to stop. So Artaxerxes was convinced and put a stop to the rebuilding of the walls. And that's why the work came to a stop. And that's why even when Ezra returned, he could not begin the rebuilding of the walls. We'll come to that in a while because this king is kind of strange. He did allow Ezra to go back, but not to rebuild the wall. So he said it very clearly, until I so change my mind, this order stands. So somewhere between, if you look up the top right corner, 464 BC to 458 BC, this order was given to stop work on the walls. And it never started again, even after Ezra returned to Jerusalem. So very strangely, Ezra was allowed to return for one sole purpose. In chapter 7 of Ezra, it says, this is a copy of the letter King Artaxerxes had given to Ezra, the priest and teacher, a man learned in matters concerning the commands and decrees of the Lord for Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, a teacher of the law of God of heaven, greetings. Now I decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including priests, Levites who wish to go to Jerusalem with you, may go. You are sent by the king and his 7 advisors to inquire about Judah and Jerusalem with regard to the law of your God, which is in your hand. Artaxerxes, on the one hand, stopped the walls from being rebuilt. But on the other hand, he was more than glad to send Ezra back with more Jews to reinstate God's law. He was very specific, only regarding the law of your God. And he said nothing about rebuilding walls. As far as he was concerned, Artaxerxes, he was a non-believer. As far as he was concerned, God's law was not a threat to his kingdom, but a city with walls within his empire was. So the walls were a threat, not God's law. So doesn't Artaxerxes then have to change his mind? Did he eventually change his mind? And if he did, what would make him change his mind? He read about a history. The Jews were a powerful nation. Other nations were paying taxes to them. So what would make him change his mind? We go now to Nehemiah. The title of today's lesson is simply The God Who Answers. First point, when we answer God's calling. When we answer God's calling, it is amazing what God can do. In Nehemiah chapter 1, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. That means his job was to taste wine before serving it to the king to make sure it had not been poisoned. To play this role for the king, obviously the king would have to be able to trust him. So he was a trusted person. And you're basically trusting your life in the hands of another guy. And if this guy was willing to take you down with him, what if he pretend that there was no poison? I mean, so you get the idea. This guy was someone who was very trusted. The king basically placed his life in his hands. Nehemiah was born and raised in Persia. Never grew up in Jerusalem. And yet somehow, he felt a great concern for what was happening there. Now, we may just simply assume that, oh, that's because he's a Jew. But there were other Jews in Persia, just like Nehemiah. But we don't read about their great concern. We don't read about them breaking down and mourning about the state of Jerusalem. But we read about Nehemiah. And I ask myself, how is it that a man like Nehemiah, yeah, sure, connected by his roots to the Jews because he's a Jew, but how does it make sense that a man like him, who never grew up in the city of Jerusalem, probably never even saw it, grew up in Persia, had a great job, how is it that he could come to have such a heightened concern for a people he did not grow up with in a city he had never been to? He was never there. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, in one of my sermons to the KL church, I once mentioned that a tree in this city of Taiping had died. Now you see, I was born in Taiping. I grew up in Taiping. Taiping is a very unique city in Malaysia. It's a city of many firsts. It was the first city that had a general hospital, first city that had its own prison, first city the first city in Malaysia that had its own railway station, museum, and whatnot. But today it's just a small city. Anyway, this was a city I was born in, not too far from Penang. So in one of the sermons, I read this news that this 136-year-old tree in Taiping finally died. And I shared that when I read about this, it made me a little sad. Oh, this tree, and the lake garden in this city, it's just beautiful. And surrounding the lake garden is this road that encircles the whole lake. And then it is lined up, the road is lined by these trees that arches over the road into the lake. I shared and I said, oh my gosh, it made me a little sad. Now, I didn't think that any of the brothers and sisters even bothered to give it a thought. A tree died. So, I mean, of course, they had no concern. I don't blame them because they were not there. They never grew up in Taiping. They never cycled past it. How could you feel for this tree? You don't even know this area. But I felt something because these trees at the Lake Garden were iconic. And I cycled past this tree many times when I was a kid. But I won't be expecting anyone else to feel for this tree because there's just no bond. Yeah, you know, we're all Malaysians, and even those who maybe came from the same city as me, who perhaps never ventured this area much, probably won't even share the same sentiment. That's my point. How did Nehemiah feel for a city he wasn't born in, never grew up in? Now, I can understand if his life in Persia was miserable and he was longing to be somewhere else. But his life would have been just fine as a cupbearer. And yet he chose to respond to a concern we all know that God placed on his heart. And this was based on reports he heard. He heard these reports. He was not there physically to see it or to feel it. He just heard the reports and he told himself, I've got to do something about this. It's like a guy from far away who heard about this tree, 136-year-old, died. He decided to move to Taiping and said, we've got to do something for the rest of these trees. And you go like, wow, where do you get this passion? Brothers and sisters, Nehemiah responded to something he heard. And in our church, in our family, the family of God, there are certainly things, many things that you and I see, not just here, hear and see, and even close enough to touch and feel. Have you responded to these areas of concern you've seen in the church, in the people around you? I remember I went to a service and service was going on and everyone was giving their hearts, worshiping God. But I couldn't help but to notice as I was standing in front, as we were worshiping, at the stage area, that the cables, the wires were all over the place. They were a hazard, an accident waiting to happen. One of the song leaders or someone going up the stage just need to catch one of the cables and trip, and we would have quite a scene, right? And someone could have injured himself or herself. And I asked the brothers and sisters, how long has this been going on for? Oh, it's like this every week. Have we not thought about cleaning up the stage, arranging these cables, and thinking, what is the best way we can actually do something? What is the best thing that we can do to clean up the stage, to make it more presentable? Maybe put some flowers, maybe whatever. That's just an example. But it could be many other things that you see. Perhaps it is someone in your small group and you see something not to say that, we're trying to be judgmental. We don't want to be judgmental and critical, but you see something, perhaps something in your friends, in one of the brothers' marriage, something in one of the sisters' parenting. Or just maybe you saw something in a sister's relationship with another sister. And I'm not saying we become nosy, but I do think we can do something about that and go like, hey, is everything okay? And a few sermons back, when we spoke about the high cost of lost devotion, I say that, we learned that things like self-interest, self-preservation very often gets in the way of us wanting to go the extra mile. And because we feel like if I ask the question, man, that means I'll be stuck here for another hour talking, or I would have to get time with them. And then I would have to risk having to say some hard things, no matter, I'm going to be sensitive, but I still have to be, but sometimes the truth can still hurt and I have to be the one to say it. And I don't like that. But we are a family. It is like someone in your home spilling something on the floor and not cleaning it up. 5 days later, you see it's still there. Does it not bother you? Certainly, God has put His Spirit in all of us. I think we need to ask ourselves if we have responded to these areas of concern, not in a self-righteous manner. I think you know what I'm talking about, but to do something to respond to the concern that God has placed in our hearts. In Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "Oh Lord," this was Nehemiah's response after obviously he mourned, he fasted, he wept. In verse 5, he says, "Oh Lord, God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps His covenant of love with those who love Him and obey His commands. Let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to the prayer, to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly toward you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, laws you gave your servant Moses." Nehemiah was not even born yet when the Israelites were taken into exile. How was this his fault? It was his father, his grandfather's generation. So how was it his sin? And how was it his wicked act, as he said so in the prayer? I think we can see that Nehemiah had a very spiritual mindset. His concern was not about whether something was fair to him or unfair to him. I didn't do it. It's not my fault. Why should I be involved in this? I didn't start this. Nehemiah saw himself as part of the problem. He took ownership of the entire thing, which makes sense to why he felt so much, why it was so personal, even though he didn't start this. His concern was about the welfare of God's people, not his personal rights, his personal interests, his feelings, or his own ego. And this, to me, brothers and sisters, is the ultimate test of our Christianity. Can we put God's will above our own? It is more than just coming to church and serving, which is great. But to really put God's interests above your own, even to the point where you take responsibility for what has happened in your group, in your ministry, in your church, as if I caused this. Please forgive me. He was not even in Jerusalem. And yet, he had an equal concern about the welfare of God's people there. We could even say that his concern was greater than many in Jerusalem. We can talk about believing in God. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? Been a disciple for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. All these are meaningless if we have not grown to be more interested in God's will and the welfare of God's church. Because the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 12 that when we got baptized into the body of Christ. God is the one that put us into his body. Is following God isn't following God more than just making our lives comfortable, free from inconveniences? Is following God not about obeying what he says and doing his will? Nehemiah was someone who had a choice. His life was not miserable. He didn't need to leave Persia. He was not running away to get a better life. He had a good job, and he was spiritual in Persia. Even in Persia, he was already spiritual. And it was because his connection with God was so strong. He felt this calling from God to do something he heard. That is the part about Nehemiah that blew my mind. And that is why he saw himself as part of the solution. When you see yourself as part of the problem, you begin to realize, you know what, I need to be part of the solution. Oh Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this servant, your servant, and the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. He began praying for Jerusalem from that day on, day and night. He prayed that God would grant him success that day. If you are not part of the solution for God's church in any capacity, then you are the problem. And you are part of the problem. Nehemiah prayed for success that day. But God's answer did not come that day. It did not come the next day, or the next, or the next. It came rather in the month of Nisan. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. Pretty remarkable record at his office, to have never been sad, always cheerful. Kislev was when Nehemiah first heard the news and started praying. Nisan was when Artaxerxes asked Nehemiah, because he saw Nehemiah was sad for the first time, what's bothering you? So Nehemiah had been carrying this concern for 4 months, day and night, praying, asking for God, please help me get King Artaxerxes to agree for me to rebuild. 4 months. Why didn't he bring up the topic to the king? I mean, isn't he the king's most trusted guy, the cupbearer? Yes. But that did not mean that Artaxerxes was his buddy or his friend. The king does not need to ask advice from Nehemiah about his kingdom. I mean, what has tasting food for the presence of poison got to do with running his kingdom? And it looks like Artaxerxes had to be the one to initiate the conversation. Because, you know, when they come together, it is not one where the king turns to Artaxerxes and go, how's things been? You okay? Slept well? Is everything okay with your family? Something had to capture the king's attention for him to initiate some sort of conversation, for him to ask the question. And the clue that Nehemiah said was this: I had not been sad in his presence before. So he had not been sad, but he was sad that day. Something about this 4 months of continuous praying and not seeing the answer, I mean, that can wear anybody out. 4 months praying day and night. I mean, that shows how much, you know, Nehemiah genuinely cared about God's people. But this guy's been praying for 4 months, praying, and, you know, he started being very determined. But you could tell that the discouragement was beginning to set in, was beginning to get him like, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. Let me just say this. Most people, I imagine myself in that situation. If I've been praying for 4 weeks for something, day and night for 4 weeks praying and receive no answer, I would very likely tell myself, well, I guess no is God's will. I guess God is saying no, that he doesn't want this to happen. And most people, if they've been praying fervently for 4 weeks, I mean, I'm not saying that we only pray for 4 weeks and expect something to happen, but you get what I'm saying. Most people will think, I guess God doesn't want me to do this. But Nehemiah went on. And he had not been sad in all of his years of service before the king. I mean, can it be possible this guy never had a bad day? But when you're serving in the presence of these Persian kings, even if you had bad days, you better not bring it with you because you are in the presence of the king. Nehemiah somehow always carried himself well before the king. So in other words, his performance review has always been with flying colors. His service all as well had been so excellent that when he had a dip in his joy, the king picked up on it immediately. Perhaps the contrast was so big from how he usually was, the king could not help but to notice something was wrong. Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. Now that is a perceptive king. If that was the case, that Nehemiah had to wait for Artaxerxes to initiate some kind of conversation, isn't it possible that it was God who allowed this to happen so this conversation can take place? Yes, it took 4 months of waiting. Yes, Nehemiah eventually felt so discouraged and worn out that he could not hide his sadness that he could usually do. And it was noticed by the king. To me, this is another example of how God works in ways we don't always immediately understand. When was the last time concern about the church or someone else's spirituality brought you this much sadness? If the church is truly our family, should we not have such levels of concern for one another? Shouldn't disciples have as much concern for, say, the full-time ministers as the full-time ministers should have for them? Who do you pray for every single day without fail for months and months and months? Who is not your physical family? I remember that the last few years, we've had a few brothers and sisters in KL who contracted cancer. And I know the church prayed for them. I know personally I prayed for them every single day for them to heal. And many of you do that. For the rest of us, what is it that we bring to God on a daily basis? Do we pray daily for members of our small group? Christians, do you pray for your small group leaders to do well? Do you pray for them to be close to God so that they can lead the groups well? Wives, do you pray for your husbands so that they can continue to be the spiritual leader for the family? Husbands, do you pray for your wives so they can be spiritual support to not just you, but the family? I think we get the idea. I hope that you pray for the KL Church for us to raise enough funds for our building, because that truly is one project that requires everyone's prayers. God could have rebuilt the walls with anyone. And yet it is only those who choose to answer God's calling who get to enjoy these miraculous experiences. Those who don't, I think they become like those in Jerusalem. They were beginning to have this casual, dull relationship with God. God wants to do it with us and through us. When we answer God's prayer, God's calling, God comes calling. God comes to our rescue. Secondly, God answers our prayers. Especially when we answer God's calling, He will answer our prayers to help us overcome the obstacles in our way. So far, we learned that Artaxerxes noticed Nehemiah's sadness and showed concern. The conversation began. Let's go a little deeper into this. The opportunity came, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you're not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and his gates have been destroyed by fire? I suspect Nehemiah was caught off guard by Artaxerxes' show of concern and comment. His question. Nehemiah wrote, I was very much afraid. And that gives us an idea that anyone serving the king should always be at their best, which is probably why he was never seen sad before, because you're supposed to show that you are happy serving the king. I mean, who knows if the king would get upset by your demeanor, by your lack of zeal, lack of joy. It could be the end for you. But the fact that he said, I was very much afraid, having prayed for 4 months, every day, with fasting, it showed that Nehemiah had no clue exactly how God was going to answer his prayer. He wasn't even expecting that. But that opportunity was open. The door was open. And of course, right there and then, he took the step of faith and expressed boldly what had been in his heart for so long. You know, Jesus says, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that was certainly what was in his heart. I think when we pray persistently for something, especially when we're pursuing God's will, God creates opportunities. It is then left for us to either choose to follow our fears and do nothing, avoid, postpone, or follow our faith. So the opportunity came, but Nehemiah still had to choose to seize it. The king said to me, what is it you want? And this is the chance, the moment Nehemiah had been praying and waiting for. And before he answered, he said, then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah where my fathers are buried, so I can rebuild it. It must have dawned on Nehemiah. This is it. Do or die. And he breathed a short prayer. God, help me. Have you ever had that kind of prayer? I'm sure we have. I have many times. And his request, cut no corners. King, please send me to the city in Judah where my fathers were buried so I can rebuild it. Now, bear in mind, Artaxerxes was the one who gave the order to stop the rebuilding because he said, why should I risk this city rebelling against me once they are strong again? Nehemiah should be killed for such a request because it is against what the king ordered. So why would this pagan king who gave an order to stop this rebuilding listen to his cupbearer, especially when he goes against the order he had given? This was a crazy and dangerous request, because what if Artaxerxes suddenly perceived Nehemiah as someone trying to revolt against him? But when you think about it, doesn't God specialize in crazy, unthinkable, unbelievable, and impossible tasks? But there is no way Nehemiah could pull through on his own. And God always creates opportunities and ways to overcome. And he inserted a clue for us in verse 6. Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked me, "How long will your journey take? When will you be back?" It pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. And this is the clue. It is unusual for the queen to be sitting beside the Persian king for official businesses. And you don't often read the queen is there. You remember that even Esther had to be summoned to be in the presence of Xerxes, the king before this. And yet, Nehemiah wrote this, or Ezra, who was the author. There must have been a reason for God mentioning this. And you know what? Many believe that the queen must have played a role in influencing Artaxerxes to be favorably disposed to Nehemiah's request. So the question is, who was this queen? If you go back to the timeline, we will see that the period from, if you remember the story of Haman and Mordecai, the period from Haman's plot to kill the Jews to Nehemiah's time was only 30 years. Esther was a very young woman when she married Xerxes, Artaxerxes' father. Xerxes was assassinated, but Esther was still alive. And she was still around by the time of Nehemiah. Could this queen had been Esther? Esther was Artaxerxes' stepmother, not his biological mother. But it's quite clear that after saving the Jews, she didn't disappear. There was no more mention. She didn't exactly disappear or went into hiding. It seems God had one more mission for her that we know of. Remember Esther's wonderful qualities? She was obviously beautiful, outstanding character, wise, sensible, great with people. And of course, after the episode, with Haman and how God delivered them, and how Esther and Mordecai grew in their faith, she added one more quality after saving a people, and there was a renewed faith in God. There is no official record to verify who this queen was, whether it was Artaxerxes' queen wife or the queen mother, Esther. But whether she was physically there or not, I believe Esther could have played an influential role in convincing the queen to help Artaxerxes to be favorable towards Nehemiah's request. And I just find that incredible. Did it just happen by chance? Well, here is a likely scenario of what could have possibly happened. Queen Esther, Queen Mother Esther, by now, she was Queen Mother, had a great influence in the queen's life, the current queen's life. In other words, Artaxerxes' wife. But the wife, Artaxerxes' wife, had to wait to be summoned by Artaxerxes. And that happened to be the day when she was summoned, because she was with the king. And that also happened to be the day when Nehemiah became very sad. That happened to be the day, perhaps, when his discouragement, Nehemiah's discouragement had reached its peak, and his emotion finally got the better of him. Perhaps it was the queen who brought it to the king's attention about his cupbearer. I mean, after all, who better to notice such an emotion of sadness, not even spoken, it's quiet, than a woman. The queen was there, could sense that there was something down. Obviously, she knew who Nehemiah was, just sensed that there's something not right. And the queen somehow brought it to the king's attention. I don't know how, but how God choreographed all these little events suddenly didn't happen by chance. And of course, because of that, Nehemiah finally had a chance to present his request. You and I will never know if this was what happened actually, but we can be certain that this would not have taken place without God's intervention. God will never leave his servants hanging, especially when they choose to answer his calling. Doors open when we take the first step of obedience. Brothers and sisters, what are we waiting for? We should always be ready to answer God's calling. One day, people are going to write some stories when we take that step of faith to answer that concern that God placed in our heart about his church. God does not believe in coincidences because he doesn't need them. When we answer God's calling, God answers our prayers. Living a life according to God's calling is living life to the full. This was the life Jesus promised his disciples that they would have. This is the life that you and I could enjoy today as well. God always answers the prayers of those who answer to his calling. Church, I hope we see by now what an incredibly awesome God that we worship. He deserves nothing but the best from us. This is the life we should live. How can we not live this life when the God we worship is this amazing? We have seen how awesome our God is. Let us return to God with all of our hearts. I thank you for your patience for these few weeks, and I hope that this series has really helped us to draw close to God every day. Thank you.